Mike, and welcome to everyone who's joining us. My name is Carol Carter, and I work with the team at Global Minded to create a capable, diverse talent pipeline. We focus on first generation to college students, students from underrepresented backgrounds, those who work with them, and those who want to hire them. So if you're joining us today as an educator or a business person who cares about keeping this really critical audience inspired and motivated and resilient during COVID especially, we're delighted to have you work with us. And we heard from you a few weeks ago when all of this started that there was an opportunity to support your work from home efforts. And so we're really delighted that people like Mike, who you're going to hear from today, are stepping up to offer insights of their wisdom to be virtual and to help people who are really teaching and learning in a distributed way at this time. So we'll be hearing from Mike today, and then we'll have a program tomorrow with Erica Twani. And for next week, we're launching with our partners, the Foundation for Climate Restoration and the World Academy of Art and Science and the Alliance Center, some really amazing celebrations for the 50th anniversary of Earth Week. So we hope you'll join us for that. And then we'll be offering sessions every week up through our conference, which is in June. And we'll keep you posted on the programming for that and what we are and aren't able to do given the situation with COVID. So thank you so much for joining us today. We're delighted to have you as part of our community. We also have a newsletter and publish interesting and motivational stories from people who have overcome all kinds of odds. So now I'd like to kick it off to our Director of Content and Events, and that is Lisa Wyckoff.
Hello, everybody. Today we have a leader in education reform, Mike Miles. And so this is going to be a very exciting presentation. The one thing, just a couple of housekeeping things, you will all be muted. Down at the bottom, there's a little chat button. So if you have questions, we will have a short question and answer session at the very end. If we don't get to your question, we're going to notate the questions and we'll get back to as many people as we can with their question. So Mike is the founder and CEO of Third Future Schools. He devotes his time to just preparing, creating schools and preparing students for 2030. Prior to starting Third Future, Mike served as superintendent in the Dallas Independent School District and the Harrison School District in Colorado Springs. So now I turn it over to Mike. Thank you, Mike. I'm going to make you host.
Okay, great. Well, welcome everybody. Thanks for joining me and the Monday team for today's presentation. We got a lot of ground to cover in just 45 minutes, so I'll get right to it. But my network of schools, Third Future Schools, we have 4 schools. Several years ago, a group of us started to think about how to design schools almost from the ground up with a new education system. So I want to talk about that today, and it's even more important today than it was a couple months ago prior to COVID-19. So let's get started. The year 2030 is coming pretty quickly, and we know we have students who are going to be graduating this year, but we also need to think about the students who are graduating several years from now. And we need to design a system now so that those students will be prepared. And even before COVID-19, we, public education, were at a nexus point. And our public education, having 51 million students, we were not preparing students for the year 2030, nor were we actually closing the traditional achievement gap, reading, writing, math. I predict that by the year 2030, more than half of those students, the 51 million kids in the current system, are not going to be reading and writing, doing math at grade level. And that's based on the NAEP trend lines. I think most people would probably agree with me with that. So just quickly, if you could just write one fundamental challenge that public education faced prior to COVID-19. Just go to the chat, just type one challenge, one phrase, one sentence, 2 words. Let's do that in just 15 seconds. Go ahead. Okay, so you can see the chat and a lot of great answers: teacher shortage, equity, quality housing in some areas, and things like that. Let me just review some of the fundamental challenges I think were most key. So the first fundamental challenge is the future. In other words, our world is changing so quickly. The workplace and our world that we live in is changing rapidly. And the question is, how do we prepare students for that world rather than the current world that we're in? So we're always challenged with that challenge, the future, but now more than ever, because of the advance of technology, we need to do even more to get kids prepared. Prior to COVID-19, we had the question of what does success look like? Now that we're not in school physically, a lot of us are asking, what do we prioritize? What does success look like for our students now, but also after we return? And then I think more than anything, hopefully people will agree with me that the COVID-19 brings into stark relief some of the inequities that were inherent in the system. These inequities existed prior to COVID-19, of course, but now we see how damaging it is for some of our at-risk or underserved populations. And then finally, and there's several challenges, these are the ones that I choose to bring out, the employee value proposition. What should schools expect of teachers, and what do teachers need to do to be a high quality teacher? So again, don't need to chat, don't need to think about it, don't need to write it down, but think just for a moment about this last question. Does the COVID-19 pandemic exacerbate or just highlight the challenges? Does the COVID-19 pandemic exacerbate or just highlight the challenges? Just take 10 seconds and think about that question. All right. I don't know how you answered, but I hope you would have said that it exacerbates the challenges that we have, especially when it comes to equity in the system, about thinking about the future, what does success look like now? All of these things existed before, but now we have to pay even more attention to that because they are exacerbated by the COVID-19 crisis. So here's the challenge for us all, and I hope this prediction is not going to be accurate, but most likely student proficiency overall is going to drop this quarter. And then you're going to have a summer, and you might have a learning lag in the summer if we don't do anything differently. And so we're going to get back to school in August or September if we're allowed to physically go back at that time, but we're going to return to school the new school year, and kids will be less proficient as a group. And year 2030 will be further away than as far as the proficiency of kids in the year 2030 will be further away. And so my biggest fear, and the key point number one of this presentation, is the following. We should not be in a rush to return to normalcy and business as usual. Rather, we should seek out ways to address some of the fundamental challenges in a systemic way. In other words, my fear is that when we get back in August or September, that there will be a rush for schools to return to normalcy. They'll say, look, we need to get back to normal. We need to establish that. We need to get back to the classrooms. We're going to try everything we can to get back to direct instruction and teachers with kids. All makes sense, except that system wasn't serving kids well before COVID-19. And so rushing back to that same system, I'm sure doesn't make the most sense to me. And instead, we have a real opportunity to reimagine education, maybe not overhaul the whole system, but just reimagine some of the things in education that will address some of these fundamental challenges. And that's what we're doing in our network. And the rest of this presentation will talk about how to do that in public education. So let me start off with key point number 2 then, this portion, and say every system, the challenges that we face in public education are indeed systemic, and so the solutions have to be systemic. I'm a fan of this quote: every system is perfectly designed to get the results it gets. And so we have to think about the solutions to public education as a system. It's as if we were looking at this diagram here, and if this was a system, they are interconnected parts. And what we've done in the last 20 years as an ed reformer, and many of you I'm sure have been in that movement, we've been trying to change parts of that system. And we've been tackling one big part at a time, because that's about as much as we can do, handling big parts of the system. But think about it as a system. Changing this cog or changing this part of the system is next to impossible without changing the rest of the system, if you want an outcome or you want a more effective system overall. So you can hardly do that well. So what we need to do is look at the system that we have and then build a different system, because if we continue to do the things that we've always done, we have the current system, then we're going to get the same outcomes. So the final point before we get to real implementation and actually how you do it operationally, is that not only do we have to think about it as a system, but if we're going to change anything systemically, then we have to change the underlying principles of that system. So changing anything systemically, when people say systemic change, really they should be looking at the underlying principles of that system and address those in order to make systemic change. So let's talk about what those underlying principles are, at least according to our network. What are they? And let me go through those quickly, but as I go through them, I want you to think about this question. Of the following 8 principles that I'm going to review, which 1 or 2 are the most important? And then 2, how would public education have to change in order to align with 1 or more of the principles? At the end of these next 5 minutes, I will give you time in a group, just a few minutes, to talk about these principles, add to them the ones that you think are the most important, and then think about, okay, how do you change the system that you're in order to address these underlying principles? So let's talk about these 8 principles. The first one is important for this time frame, and it's learn anywhere and everywhere and anytime. We started doing this in our network, and now that COVID-19 is here, we're going to have to move our system onto steroids to do this even more. In 2017, this is the way, or in our current system, this is the way education looks. Really, it should look more like this, where other groups are helping out and kids are learning, and we can talk about what content, anytime and everywhere. I'm going to talk more about that towards the end. Principle number 2 is learning is personalized and more geared to a student's interests. Number 3 is principles. Our parents have access to an expanded number of choices of schools and programs. Those are self-explanatory. Let me talk about number 4, which is not. So our principle number 4 is that we have to redefine the value proposition. And that value proposition is based on what the school values in fair exchange for what the employees gain from working in that system. Right now, we have an incoherent, unaligned employee value proposition. In other words, no organization can maximize its effectiveness if what it values is disconnected from how it compensates people. So right now in public education, or almost everywhere, yes, there are some outliers, but 99.5% of all schools and districts pay people on a salary schedule. So a school's value, or what we value as a school, what parents value, are things like high achievement, um, graduation rates. They value citizenship, good behavior, safe and orderly. They value equity in some places. Whatever that list is, there is a list that exists if you ask your parents, and they will tell you what they value in a school system. Right now, people are valuing the fact that that when school's in session, they're allowed to drop off their kid in a safe environment and they can go to work. What we compensate people, though, is for years of experience and college credit or professional development credit. Those two are not aligned. And so we have a chance to change that. That's an underlying principle of our current education system that needs to change. Learning is focused on how we think and how we learn. That's what it should be as we move from literacy and numeracy, which are important, but increasingly kids should be taught how to think and learn. So number is another underlying principle, and that is what a student should know and be able to do. We think it's important to have good content, right? We still think reading, literacy, numeracy is still important in 2030, or will be in the year 2030. But a child's education is more than just the content of math, science, social studies, and literature. We believe that a child's education is also based on their experiences. Things like traveling abroad. Let me give you a specific example in my own life. I have 3 kids. My youngest son is sitting here in this room with me. He's home from the University of Miami. He's a freshman there. And I think about Anthony's education. And Anthony went to a good school. We're in an upper middle class neighborhood, and his school had a lot to offer, a good band program, a good video arts, visual arts program, all of that. But Anthony's education started when he was a little kid, a child, when he was at home. He had music lessons, he had a piano lessons, he went to some swim meets, he was on soccer teams, he traveled to other parts of the United States, he had conversations with his older brother and sister about politics. He had a lot of those things, partly because we could afford to buy him a piano, to give him a MacBook and a Surface Pro when he was just 12 years old and 8 years old. And so that part of his education can't be understated. And we need to provide that sort of education for our students that we serve in our communities.
Excuse me, Mike?
Sure.
Can you kind of stand to the side of your slides, because where you're standing is in front of them.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you.
I'll do that. Okay, and then finally, penultimately, community groups need to be tapped. In our network, one of our underlying principles is that we don't do everything. We're good at teaching math, language arts, science, but we're not the best at performance arts. So we need to tap community groups. So in our school in Colorado Springs, one of our schools in Colorado Springs, Caperni 3 is the name of that school. They work with the Colorado Springs Conservatory, bus kids to that conservatory where they take music lessons, they can dance, they can do theater, and we do that 3 times a day for our students. The YMCA, our gymnasiums are not at our schools. They are at the YMCA, they're at Lava Island, they're at Aurora Fitness, they're at several other facilities in the community that help teach and educate our kids in physical education. And then finally, and maybe too much for most folks as far as a principle, but we're the only system in the United States that I know of that has a checks and balances governance system. The underlying principle that currently exists in America's schools is that you have a board, and then you have a principal, or you have a board and a CEO, or a board and a superintendent. It's an unstable system because it's a two-legged stool, usually with one leg being larger than the other leg. And if everybody's a good actor, then the stool can still stand upright. But once you have some aberrant behavior on anyone's part, then the system starts to get unstable. And so we have a three-legged stool with some real checks and balances, and it works really well.